Well, hi everybody, welcome. I'm Julie Lowndes, and I'm here with Eli Holmes from NOAA Fisheries. Eli's the open science lead at NOAA Fisheries, and I'm at OpenScapes as the lead. And we're both co-leads of NOAA Fisheries OpenScapes, which is implementing the NOAA Fisheries data strategy for reproducible and open science. And NOAA Fisheries is also abbreviated as NIMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Service. So you might hear us say that acronym at some point as well. The goals for our session today is we're going to focus on one story, which is GitHub governance at NOAA Fisheries. And we've developed this session through a storytelling lens with Liz Neely of Liminal. And her work was in designing this was strongly inspired by Marshall Gantz. And those are both linked in the doc. Um, so we'll be telling this story together as an interview between me and Eli. And then we're going to have some group activities so that you all can reflect on your own stories and vision, and that we all can think about culture change in a new lens and a storytelling sense that we can all amplify with each other and repeat. And so this was our value to session participants that we included in our abstract, is that we're here to help us all feel not alone, and really help us develop language and stories to point to describe what is possible and how we can work to change hard things. So we're going to be using both the document in KikoChat and these slides, but they're all linked from the doc. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is to start off kind of setting the scene with a pictorial history of GitHub at NIMFS. So Eli, I'll turn it over to you to tell the story.
Hi, everyone. I am Eli Holmes, as Julie said. And I've been at NOAA Fisheries since 1999, so quite a long time. And I've been really involved in data science, training. I'm an applied mathematician, but I also, as part of my work, I'm really involved in like developing open source and developing R packages and that kind of thing, and also teaching. I'm an affiliate faculty at University of Washington. So it's a little bit about kind of my background. So the story of GitHub at NIMFS, 2013. NOAA sent out a memo authorizing the use of GitHub for sharing scientific work. And one of my close colleagues, and actually somebody who's involved with NIMFS OpenScapes, was part of developing this memo and getting this memo to come out. And he was seeing that, code sharing was becoming more and more common in science. And he really was feeling like we need to have some guidance from up top saying, yeah, it's okay for us to be using this. We don't be left behind here. So that happened in 2013. And over that period, just like the rest of science, we see this rapid growth in the use of GitHub. People are finding that, they can create things and share them and then build on others' work. And everyone, well, first off, we develop better, more robust tools by sharing things, but also like science is accelerating as we're not all recreating the same things. We can look at other people's code and it can help us solve our own problems. We can build off other people's code in many, many different ways. And over the next, decade, GitHub use starts growing rapidly. So at first it was kind of slow, but then it's getting rapid, really rapid. And this is the Circa picture in 2022. That big circle there are organizations, GitHub organizations. So we have lots of different organizations. We do have some that are in GitHub Enterprise. That in NEFC is one of our science centers. They had a big GitHub Enterprise installation, and they really encourage their staff to use that. The other ones are all in GitHub free. But as you can see, there were a lot of organizations being heavily used. And our story of kind of how things have changed since 2022 is what we'll be talking about today.
Great. Thanks, Eli. So I see in this picture here, we've got OpenScapes with several years with arrows. And what that signifies is that we led champions cohorts with NOAA Fisheries. So these are 40-person cohorts that we lead remotely where folks are learning team building skills around data science and coding and documentation, and also being exposed to GitHub as a project management and collaborative tool in addition to its powers as version control. So my first question for you, Eli, is back in those early days in 2021 in our first OpenScapes cohorts, and we were working together, we were teaching GitHub, but we were also hearing from NOAA colleagues that they were unsure of who had permission to use GitHub or how. So can you talk about that challenge?
Yeah. So, the background of that first, I guess it was, that first OpenScapes cohort in 2021. So I'm part of a math biology group at the Northwest Fisheries Science Center. It's one of our science centers. It's kind of like a national laboratory. And we've been talking a lot about the need for staff to have training in open science tools, reproducible tools. Using version control and GitHub is one of them. And so we organized, I and a colleague, we organized that first OpenScapes cohort. And really the objective was to just help get the training out there. And but that experience of that cohort did something else. The people who are really heavy GitHub users, we had always been working solo, and we used it a lot ourselves. And maybe we would help one colleague here, one colleague there, the people we're working closely with, but we weren't really thinking beyond our little circles. And when we had that first cohort, it brought together a group of us who had really similar ideas about this need to train people in using GitHub. I mean, when I say GitHub, it could have been GitLab. It's really about like version control and open sharing, but I'm going to be saying, GitHub. So, because that's what we ended up using. So it brought together myself, Josh London, and Emily Markovitz. We were the three key people. There were two other people who were kind of adjacent. But it brought us together and we started talking. And we also were listening to our colleagues and realizing, like you said, there was a lot of people didn't know about the 2013 memo, or we were talking with people at other science centers, and worse, we hear that they're like, oh no, we were told we can't use it. And then like my colleagues and I'm at Northwest, my colleagues were at Alaska Science Center, another national lab, and we're like, what on earth are you talking about? Like, we have this memo, you can use it. No, we should be using it. And like, no, we're told we can't. So so we begin to realize that there's just so much confusion. And we also realized that there wasn't any like guidance about like how best to use it. And we saw people using practices that we just thought were like poor, not professional. And or they just didn't know how to use it. So we
Is that when you started writing the GitHub guide together?
yeah. So that was kind of interesting. So we were like, well, we can't write a GitHub guide because like, no, that has to come from up top. And there exists no group that manages and governs GitHub. It's certainly not us. And so we were like kind of paralyzed for a while, which is a common theme here. But then we realized, but we're the experts. Like who else would it be than us? And we're like, "Yeah, it's okay for us to help our peers." And that was kind of a really change in our thinking, to help our peers. Yes, they're mostly public repos. It's both, but it's mostly public. Yeah, and so that was a change in our thinking. It's like, yeah, we really have something to offer. There's no one else who could write this, or we're the best people to be writing this. And so let's just do it. And
Yeah.
Josh and Emily and I are kind of like both people. We get an idea and then we sit down that evening, and so so that's what we did. Yeah.
That's
And
awesome. So
really,
so
really
yeah,
changed things.
yeah. So that GitHub guide and having something that you could look at and point at was super. That was a big inflection point here. I remember you first talked about your ideas for organizational change at the ESIP 2022 winter meeting, so 3 years ago now. And you started telling this story as it was emerging, but you chose to think differently and actionably as you framed your approach going forward. Can you talk about like kind of this change in your thinking and the choices that you made? And I'll
Yeah.
advance the slide when you're ready. Yeah.
Yeah, you can go ahead and advance that slide.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so that was a big change. That was sometime in 2022, I think. So what's happening is, we wrote this guide. It was a lot of work. And then we felt like, okay, how we really felt it was important to adopt this, that we needed some kind of better, like so many people, they write their code, it's just on their laptop, they're not sharing it, other people can't see it. Once we started doing these cohorts, you're just like hammered by the amount of duplication of effort. It's just so sad to see like so much wasted time. Um, and people not being able to learn from each other because all of this code is just kind of locked in, people's computers. Or so we really felt we need to adopt this, and we needed some kind of like at least either we can put a lot of our stuff public, so we could make it public, or in inner source, but we didn't know how to even move forward. And um
I
so
remember, Eli, you said this was during the pandemic when the diffusion of innovation theory was something you learned, and it was when
yeah,
you were asked to
yeah,
write down your goals. Can you take us
right,
back there? Yeah.
yeah. So you invited me to give this talk, and I sat down and I thought, well, what do I want to talk about? And then I was really struggling, like, what do we do next? I had to decide what the next move was. And I think I was bouncing an idea off, and then you told me that Aaron had talked about this like diffusion of innovation, because I was like, yeah, I want to talk about something like how innovation spreads. And so that she kind of turned me on to this diffusion of innovation. So then I went into this long, like, exploring this idea, and this became really influential to me. And so the diffusion of innovation theory is this idea that, like, when you have a new idea, that first off, the innovators come up with the idea, and then the next group are your early adopters. And your early adopters are absolutely critical, because those are the people that take an idea and do all the work to make it like good, acceptable, like something that the rest of the people, the rest of the organization wants to adopt. Because when that first idea comes out, like with the innovators, it's actually fairly, useless, honestly. Like only somebody really technical can use it. It's a really common thing. And those early adopters are driven to create things that people can use. They're kind of like the tool builders. And they just can't stop themselves from doing this. And so like um in this literature I was reading, it really emphasized the importance of reaching that early adopter group. You had to make sure that you had fully saturated that, because those are the people who are going to do the necessary work, the necessary like outreach, creating the documentation, working on the tool to actually make it useful to other people, all that work. And so, yeah, so that was the point. And I stepped back and I was like, because I thought, hey, it's time to reach out to headquarters. It's time to, like, we got to hit leadership. And I stepped back and I said, no, we need to spend a year really doing a whole lot more outreach. But the problem was, like, if you're in a federal agency, like, for those of you who are at a federal agency, you'll empathize with this. Like, I had no way to just like contact people. Like, I can email them, but like I can't send out a broadcast email to like my whole agency. How would I contact the people who would be interested in this? And these are people who wouldn't even know they're interested yet. Um, and so what was interesting there is this is going to sound kind of funny. It's funny thinking back on it, but I was like, okay, I've got to figure out how to like outreach to these people. So I have to create something that the type of people who would be early adopters would want to be part of, right? These people haven't adopted GitHub yet, but they're the type of people who'd want to. And so
Yeah.
we started an R user group that became really popular. And that was the way we outreach. We were able to connect with the early adopters.
That's very cool. And that our users group, I think, also was that an earlier, smaller group around a fisheries model, and then so you like started with what existed and adapted and grew. Is that right?
Well, no, we collaborated with that. So
Okay.
that wasn't, so we were separate, but we had a specific group, a fisheries group, and they wanted to be focused on stock assessment, but because there wasn't R training, they ended up
Mm,
doing a lot of R training. And so
okay.
what we did is we reached out to them and said, hey, our group, a bigger group, more general group, we will take over the R training. And so we had been doing in-house art training. And what we did is we were like, we'll just open that up to actually, we opened it up to all of NOAA, which was scary in the beginning. I thought, well, do I have to have permission to just open this up? And then I realized, no, I didn't realize. And then I just like, I got courageous and I was like, okay, fine. I
Let's do it.
just do it. Like, why can't I just do it? I just invite everybody. And so he like
Yeah.
publicizing that. But also like this issue of like getting allies.
Mm.
I also realized, this diffusion of innovation theory and thinking about how you make that jump from early adopter to early majority, which are like your leadership,
Hmm.
different types of leadership. I realized there that I personally was going to need to develop or move out of my little local world and more into a leadership world. And
Hmm.
figuring out how to make those allies, understanding those groups better, getting to know people. And so that was a process too over that year.
So that's really neat. So that's like you were kind of in the innovator category and saw this early adopter category that you really needed to invest in, to find, to grow, to connect, and then also level up yourself and think about who else could be an early adopter, whether or not they were in a role that would use GitHub and code or be in a leadership amplifying change making role. I think that's so awesome. And I think that like things were evolving from there and gaining more visibility and momentum. And so my next question, and we'll shift to the next slide, is it seems like things changed at the end of fall 2022. So like at the end of that year, we had just run 4 concurrent champions cohorts with 120 staff at the same time across the agency. And your group of early adopters, this open science group at NOAA Fisheries, was growing and investing in the GitHub guide and all of this. But there was a big change that you all made in in order to shift between early adopters and early majority. Can you talk about this change here next?
Yeah, that was a big change. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. So the big change is we decided to put a lot of effort into GitHub Enterprise. So we had all our organizations in GitHub Free, and groups would just create a new organization and, go that way. We didn't really have any kind of, we have best practices, but not any like kind of regulation
Mhm.
of these activities. And we had this memo that said that we could use GitHub in this way. And so within our group, which had gotten bigger by then, kind of the core group, which we are now calling ourselves NIMS Open Science, um, we we were now like trying to think about like how do we get our leadership support. So we want to make this jump into that early majority and late majority. Well, first the early majority. So that's your leadership, and they're going to be, their kind of needs and what they were expecting from us were going to be different than this, the early adopters, which would be like our scientists who, um, and so we're thinking about that. And I had, developed these allies who were kind of closer to leadership than I was, and I'm talking with these ideas, and many of us really wanted to stay focused on GitHub Free and have just guidelines for use. But my mentors, they're listening to this and they're basically saying like, Eli, that's naive. That is naive. That, if you're going to have these official NOAA products, and we're going to have a lot of them, right? It's not just a kind of a few things that kind of fly under the radar. If we're going to be like promoting these, like that's just not going to happen if it's not, if we don't have these security controls.
Mhm.
IT is never going to go for it. And at some point, yeah, it's fine to fly under the radar if like, yeah, it's just sort of little, but if you really want to spread this, you're going to have to go for an enterprise solution.
Mhm.
And that was hard. That was really scary because the core team had a lot of experience with IT taking over an enterprise solution and then making it unusable. And so there was a big fear that this tool that was critical for us would be made unusable. And it happened. It had happened before. So there was reasons people were scared. Um, but
So
we,
your vision, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So
Yeah.
this was one of our visioning. So we finally agreed that, yeah, we did need enterprise for things that were like official products. Like that was going to be important. But we still had this other part where we felt like we were going to need GitHub Free for some things too, like, collaborating, outside collaborators and various things. So, yeah, so that's where that change came from. It was scary in many different ways, um, like giving up control, worrying about giving up control
Mhm.
was scary, but we, felt like we had to do that. Um, But when we go to the other slides, and I'll tell you what happened next, I'll also explain why that it was scary and other reasons too.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, what does GitHub governance look like now in 2025?
Yeah, so yeah, you can go to the next slide. So,
Or a
um,
year in?
yeah, a year in, it's more than a year, really. So once we decided that, so then we needed to figure out how to make that happen. And we did have one science center that had enterprise, so it seemed easy. we would just convince the other science centers to do that too. And so, and then it would spread organically. And it didn't happen that way. Uh, so I went to my center and my IT, and I said, hey, the Northeast has an enterprise org. Could we have one too? And they said, no. I said, no, why? They are using it. And they're like, well, they are, but they don't have permission to do that. I said, what are you talking about? Like, and he's like, yeah, no, but no, they don't have this thing called authorization to use. I was like, okay, okay. Um, let's get one. How do we get one? Headquarters does that. Okay. Um, how how do we get them to do that? Let's try to get that thing. And they're like, I can't help you. That's not something we do. You have to go to headquarters. And I'm like, how do I just like you don't like just email them out of the blue. So I had no pathway to get where I wanted to go. So that getting that authorization to use was an interesting process. I eventually did, but yeah, it was hard. But so
Yeah.
eventually we did. Yeah, we did. We got headquarters and it was a long process, and circuitous. There was nothing straightforward about it. It was a lot of chance, a lot of luck, making the right connections, the right people who had the same goals that we did, who were higher in leadership, and kind of synergizing.
Yeah.
And now we are
Well,
1 year in. Yeah,
yeah.
all the centers have
Amazing.
enterprise. It's great.
Eli, will you just touch on the bullets on this slide briefly, and then we'll ask more reflections on uh what this took. But I think the reflection on your 1 year into the rollout of
Yeah,
GitHub
yeah. Oh,
Enterprise,
right.
what does
Yeah,
that
thanks.
mean? Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah.
yeah.
So 1 year in, um, so all of our science centers, which are like national laboratories, they have a GitHub enterprise organization, and they have a standard operating procedures for how they onboard staff, and we have lots of licenses, and so we're really encouraging everyone to get on. Um, I think we have maybe one or two headquarters offices that don't have theirs yet, but they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's hard to know what fraction of our target staff are on.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely all are heavy GitHub users, but
Mm-hmm.
we are promoting this as a very important project management
Mm-hmm.
platform also. Like, we need people who are not the coders to also be aware of what
Mm-hmm.
is happening in projects. And so we would
Mm-hmm.
really like all our people who are involved, like in our data science workflow, to be able to be on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, same as like we use Google work, Google Drive and all that at work. And so
Mm-hmm.
everybody's on that. We would like GitHub to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to know what fraction of staff. I would say 20%.
20%.
And then we have lots of training. We've been doing like um, twice a week for parts of the year. We're doing the
Yeah,
trainings.
it's impressive how much onboarding you've
Yeah,
done in such a
lots
short time as well. Like brand new folks and folks, yeah, as you say, working on different parts, project management, coding, documentation. It's super awesome. Um, and governance has been a huge part of this. So will you share a bit about this? And this will go into the next slides as well.
Yeah. So talk about, yeah, go ahead, go to the next slide.
Yeah, joint governance, super impressive.
So I talked a little bit about the fears within the core group. Um, Fears of a platform that was in we don't just use this for like version control. We use all like the GitHub Actions, we use GitHub Pages.
Mhm.
We're delivering packages this way. We have this as part of our like data Q&A, and then data serving um, pipelines. Like we don't serve data on GitHub, but we'll have like some of our processing happens with our GitHub Actions. So like the NOAA Observer program, some of that data is like happens in these pipelines on GitHub. So people were really, really scared that of losing control and things breaking. And so we had some experience with governance where the end user is us, is the scientist and the data people who are using GitHub. So we had experience with those people being an integral part of governance of a platform, and with our Posit Connect. And we wanted something like that with GitHub because we felt it was absolutely important that the end user have equal control. Like we didn't want to be like represented. We wanted to be part of the team. And so, yeah, so we went very formal. We have a formal GitHub governance team with it has some formal name for terms of reference. Terms of reference.
Mm-hmm.
We have a
Mm-hmm.
governance system where IT and our end users are from every center that has one of these enterprise orgs, they have a representative. So we have
Mm-hmm.
to have both, and we have
Mm-hmm.
equal voting. So it's not like one side can veto the other side. We have to come to consensus. So if there are disagreements, we need to work those out and come to an agreement that both sides can agree to. And it's been really
That
great.
is
It was rough
impressive.
at the beginning. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
very collaborative.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Amazing. Um, just doing a time check. Our conversation's been going on for about 25 minutes already, which is awesome. I know we have a few more slides to continue talking about, and then we'll be able to reflect together and discuss with the group here. But we're doing well on time. Um, but here, yeah, do you want to talk about this slide in GitHub Enterprise, and then some more
Yeah.
reflections? Yeah.
So part of our motivation was that there were some of us in the core team who were very aware of rules, mandates, congressional acts that were likely coming down the pipeline to affect our regulatory science. We'd already seen this with EPA. And this has to do with making the data and the code that process that data, making that available for regulatory decisions.
Mhm.
That hadn't exactly happened yet for us, but you could kind of see that like that's the way things are going. There's been a number of acts and policies related to. There've been so many. This is only a few of them.
Yeah.
There's so many open source policies, and so
Yeah.
looking down, we felt like we need a really solid foundation to meet that. To how are we going to make 20% of our code open source, and so
Mhm.
that was part of the motivation. And now GitHub Enterprise will be the foundation for, how we are meeting those.
Great.
So puts us in a good
Yeah.
place. We're happy about that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's super forward thinking. Um, so will you reflect a bit more on the conditions for the diffusion of innovation? I mean, this theory is so helpful for telling this story. I'll go to this
Yeah.
slide.
Yeah, so I thought I'd put this slide in there, and I know it's very wordy, but I guess I just wanted to write down about like how we got to where we are, because people always ask me like, well, so it's typically people are really, they believe that, yeah, we should be using, version control. We should be using GitHub. We should be sharing our code, with the team, with each other internally and also publicly if appropriate. Um, but how do you get people to adopt this? And it was not clear how to do it in the beginning. And we had to figure out how to move forward, even though we didn't know how to get to where we wanted to go. And so we started by, on the left there is kind of the sort of general principles, like, okay, is there anything we can do that will do one of those four things? And if we're doing that, at least we're kind of moving in the right direction.
Mhm.
And so we started with the bullet point at the top, just creating this like best practices guide. Well, first we just
Mhm.
started talking, but that
Mhm.
was
Like
something we
emailing
could
code.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
emailing code between yourselves is a problem that causes pain. GitHub
Yeah.
can support that, like that kind of thing. Yeah,
Or the pain was that people had no guidance.
right.
We could say, you know what, it was like three, it ended up about five of us who were really involved. Um, and we had managed teams that used GitHub really actively. And so we were like, okay, we will write something that's not just for our own teams, but is like generally, that is
Mhm.
sort of general. And we'll just do it. So that's how we got started.
Mhm.
And then like the authorization to use, um, that, um, yeah, did not know how to do that. Did
Mhm.
not know how to do that. Had no idea how to do that. And yet I realized like where I was told you got to get it, could
Mhm.
not figure out. I had no idea how to figure out how to get that.
Mhm.
No idea. I had no one I could ask. And I was like, somebody asked me to be in a meeting, and we were talking. What were we talking about? We were talking about something else. It was about coding, and like IT stuff. But
Mhm.
I volunteered. I said, yeah, I'll come, and I'm an expert in X, blah blah blah. I'll come, and I'll help. So I was like offering my expertise, and I
Mhm.
looked at who was at the meeting, and I realized this person is from the headquarters IT.
Mhm.
They're actually
Mhm.
the lead of it. So they're like, way, way, way above me.
Wow.
But they were there. And I
Yeah.
was like, at the end of the meeting, I just said, here goes nothing. And I said, hi, hey, since you're here, I was wondering if you could like maybe help me with something else. I was told we need to get this authorization to use, but I have no idea like how one would go about that. So that's what I did. I just
And that
happened to be
started
in
the
a meeting, and and this person was like, oh, well, you need to have a Lisa. I don't know what that is. It has to be on the Lisa list. And then and then they like immediately chatted with someone, and they got the response within like seconds. And I was like, oh yeah, it's on the Lisa list. Yes, you can get the authorization to use. And then
amazing.
that didn't help me. I didn't know what
Right.
the step was. And
To
then
do
so
next.
and then I like got my courage, and I just said, could I email you about that to get instructions? Right? Like it
Yeah.
was terrifying. Like this person is so many steps above me. Like when you're in a rigid hierarchy, you don't just email people. You email your supervisor. You don't go beyond that. And here I'm like, oh my God,
Yeah.
they're at headquarters, but I did it.
Yeah.
And that's how
Amazing.
I did it.
And I mean, you said you happened to be in this meeting, but I would say you created that luck, right? This is something we talked about when we
Oh yeah.
were designing this conversation, right? Like you were seeking people out, listening, saying yes to things and offering your expertise, right? Like as a gift. You're like, I don't know what to ask you yet, but I have something to offer so that we can build a relationship. And I think that then takes us to this last slide to share about the elephant in
Yeah.
the room. Yeah, because you were there based on on building a lot of trust with people to get in those rooms.
Yeah. So, yeah, I wanted to put this here because I, through this process and other processes I've been part of, um, there there's a big elephant in the room of lack of trust. Um, and I think it comes, I'm sure the IT side also has lack of trust of the scientist, but definitely the end user, the scientist community has a lot of lack of trust. Um, they have reasons to feel like policies were developed that are like harmful and didn't consider their needs, or they're just not well designed, or that, kind of sticks are used without like need or thought. And like if you don't kind of address that lack of trust, it's going to sabotage your adoption. And reestablishing trust takes time. And I think that like creating small steps where both sides can show good faith and can show that they're able to have productive discussions and not get snippy with each other or sabotage efforts is what it takes. But it's slow. You don't start with a big step and then, have a big stick and think, oh, everybody's going to jump on board. No, that's just going to show them like, yeah, you are really not to be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that, yeah, that has taken time, and it's been, I've had to be intentional about that. I think about that a lot. How to increase trust and, things we can do to develop more trust between these groups who need to work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much, Eli, for sharing all of that. Um, we know that we've covered a lot here, and we want to both discuss more details about this story with you all, but also help us all think about these other stories and what like our diffusion of innovation theories look like in different places and what our chasms might be that we can cross. So we wanted to take the next 15 minutes, we might adjust for time a little bit, but to focus on some silent journaling. But Eli, yeah, please.
Well, I just want to pause for a moment. Did we want
Yeah,
to jump right to this, or let people ask questions if there's anything they wanted
yeah.
us to
Let's
expand?
take, you're right. Let's take some questions if there's ideas at this point. There's been some questions in the chat. Yeah, Rich, please go ahead.
Yeah, Eli. There was a similar trajectory, I guess, with GitHub at USGS, and I see Leslie Shoes on here. So Leslie, please jump in if I say anything wrong. But everybody had repos all over the place, and there was this big effort to migrate everybody to, at some point we got the enterprise organization, but there was a lot of pain and sort of outrage, at least on my part and some other people, that we would have to move all of our repos, from where they were to this new organization, and in the process, break a lot of URLs that were out there in the wild, like as part of like answers to Stack Overflow questions, or as example notebooks and all sorts of things. How did you guys handle that? Or did you not just let people, was it like just the new people who came along who, you would say, okay, hey, here's our org. Or did you try to move the people who already had stuff?
Uh, we are migrating things over, yeah. So helping people migrate over. And so our end users basically said, yeah, that's a non-starter for me to break all my URLs. And so we wrote up instructions for how not to break it. Actually, one of our IT guys had run into this himself, and so he had learned like how you set things up. You have to keep the original like org, or it's a particular repo with a particular JSON in it that does the redirect. So that's how we dealt with it. So those URLs there are not broken. There are some people for whom it breaks, but they would have made that decision that that was okay. We also didn't use a big stick. We didn't say you have to.
Yeah, I feel like that's important.
Yeah. And we are right now, we are like trying to figure out if we still have big GitHub orgs that are outside of enterprise, and it has to do with that we have some projects that have heavy outside collaborators, and they will have private repos. If we move that into enterprise, we'd have to buy licenses, and that is too expensive. So like for our whole agency, like we polled people, and our scientists would say, yeah, I have like 10 on average, like 10 outside collaborators on private repos among our heavy users. We're like, oh my God, no, we can't buy all those licenses. You multiply that over the whole agency. So we're trying to figure out like how to deal with that. It's good because we have a governance committee that is equally the end users, and at now we're really solution oriented. We don't want to break things. Like nobody in the group wants to break things. And so we try to come up with solutions that are going to work for everyone.
Great, thank you.
I think one interesting thing for me was to figure out that, or discover people who really wanted to use GitHub for pain points that they had that I didn't realize. So like one of our groups that very quickly adopted it was a regional office. They do like regulatory stuff. And I was a little surprised about that, but their IT immediately recognized that this would solve a really hard records management problem they were having that they just couldn't figure out how to solve. And so they're like, oh wow, this could solve it. And so they really wanted that. There was another one. I forget. There's another maybe about like licensing, like figuring like we all like, yeah, our groups who worry a lot about licensing and make sure we have the right licensing on our code. So they were really enthusiastic because this was a way we could show that we had applied an open license from the get-go. So that was something I learned by this is like being open to people wanting to use something for different reasons, and then getting allies that way.
Let's see, Rich, do you have a follow-up? And then I see Jonathan.
Yeah, well, that on that point of licensing, it just like a little light bulb it made me remember that we used to tell this success story, like when we had our in development work at USGS was out there in the open. We were working on some project that wasn't sensitive or anything, like, oh, let's keep it open, and we had some issue that we raised, and somebody, a complete anonymous person, like submitted a fix like to the problem we were having, and along with a test. And I was like, this is amazing, like this is why GitHub is keeping it public is so great. And somebody said to me, well, actually that breaks there's a federal rule that says you can't have people just contribute to government work for free. Did you ever run into that one?
No. And our l- our memos we have an open source and software management memo that just came out, but it's been in the works for many years, and it explicitly talks about the value of working with the community and having community input on our open source projects.
Great.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, so really, yeah, thanks, Rich, for bringing those topics up. My question is about the scope of GitHub for your for marine fisheries and NOAA at large. Are you just focused on code repositories?
We use GitHub for a variety of types of content. Typically, yeah, it's something that's kind of code plus text. So we do a lot of our like reports with R Markdown or Quarto or Jupyter Notebooks, so you JupiText, something that's combining our code and our text. And so it would include that sort of thing.
Sure.
There are some data, but it's smaller data just because it's hard to have like big data in GitHub.
Yeah, there's no specific restriction from putting data on GitHub, data that are, that might be the only place to find it.
Yeah, we can put data there, but we have other systems for serving data that are more like designed for that. So we have a number of different a lot of different data serving options.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
But I mean, we do have data packages for sure.
Yeah, where I found it's useful is often associated with a larger product, but this sometimes you want to have the data associated with the project so you can rerun the code, rerun the analysis rather than going to maybe 100 different sources, and who knows if those would still be available at that time.
Yeah.
So there's some really important use cases for GitHub as a data repository. But
yeah.
That's kind of pushing the limits of our DOI authorized uses for GitHub. We're not supposed to put data out there except under very limited circumstances.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, I don't think we have explicit limitations, but like NOAA runs, a big observer program, not observing systems and ocean observing, so that's how I'm qualifying here. I'm like, no, I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. Like we have other systems for that. But like if we have like an R package or we have some sort of processing pipeline for certain kinds of things, like we might have that data there. But it's
yeah. Just in the terms of time, let's take John. Sorry to cut this off. John, Ralph, let's have your question and then we'll continue on with the activity.
Not so much as a question, but an observation that it's hard to characterize all of NOAA's use of GitHub. I would say that the memo that authorizes GitHub for NOAA use is focused on software that we want to release to the community. It is not necessarily for every piece of software ever, nor is it really intended for data, but it's really hard to characterize what NOAA is doing because every office is doing something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, my comments are specific to NOAA fisheries, very specific to NOAA fisheries. I will note, however, that I am on that working group that developed the NOAA administrative order for software management. I'm also on the working group developing the handbook. So I'm I work with people across NOAA on these issues too. But I think
Sure.
enterprise is just at fisheries that I know of. I think so.
Great. Okay, well, we wanted to give you all, yes, GitHub for documentation is a huge part of NOAA Fisheries as well. Let's take maybe 4 minutes on each of these times, just so we have a little bit of time to reflect together afterwards and share. So I'm going to set a timer for 4 minutes and ask you to silent journal a little bit, and think about this framing of a challenge you're facing, and if there's a choice upcoming or some idea you have or some sense of change. This could be something you've kind of come through already or that you're facing now. And we also had a couple notes in the doc about what Eli highlighted as she was crossing the chasm here, like thinking about allies, offering values to others and bringing others along. So I'm going to set this alarm, and you're welcome to use our doc or write anywhere else you'd like to do. Well, thanks for taking that time to write things down and have a look in the doc at other people's notes. Yeah, let's discuss. Is there something that you've seen in the doc or that's on your mind that you want to raise? Doesn't have to be what you contributed. It could be in response to something else that you see here.
Yeah, maybe some of those who, wrote something down could, share out a little bit and, talk about that. Talk about the challenge that you wrote about.
Ian or Keenan, would you be willing to share a little bit more about your bullet points?
I could give it a shot, although I guess my challenge is very distinct from like the organizational challenges that we're discussing in this session. But like I'm a
Great.
I'm a PhD student right now, and I'm like not attached to any one particular project in my lab. I'm just kind of doing my own thing, which is really cool in that I get to do like whatever I want, but it's also kind of a drawback in that I don't really like I have to do a lot of legwork to do team science. And so what I've been trying to do is, coming to meetings like this and like cold emailing like authors on papers that I really like, to try and like build my own network kind of from whole cloth. Over the past year, like I feel I've had some mixed success with this, but I can definitely tell that like I'm much more skilled like technically than I was like a year ago, and like overall I see like my project getting like better and better. So call that partial success so far.
That is so cool to hear, and like that's a skill you're building too, to actively pursue others, to cold email, to come to things. That's a skill as much as a technical skill. It's a muscle you can build. Has it felt easier at all as you've tried
It's
different
definitely
things?
felt easier because I think like I've kind of come to understand that in science, like it's just kind of understood that like it's totally fine to just like contact someone out of the blue, especially if you preface it with "I think you're really interesting." Like people generally respond positively to that. Yeah, so in that sense, it's definitely like much easier knowing that people respond positively to that sort of thing.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
I think for me, the exercise of like doing kind of visioning where I want to get to or where I want a project to get to has been really, I see a very strong correlation between doing that exercise and actually ending up in the place where I'm visioning I'd like to be. Yeah. Especially as I move, like if I move into a new area, like a science area that I don't have experience, and kind of like putting down and writing, like I'm trying to go in that direction. Yeah.
Great. Ian, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I can do a quick share. Just the challenge is in my small corner of a very big agency at the Goddard Space Flight Center, trying to encourage others to adopt a culture of code sharing. Even just within our group, everybody has a history of doing their own code on their own laptops, just like Eli was describing. So there was just talking to people about it. We get a lot of the sort of like the story that everybody says is like, well, it's really hard to do the official process to be able to share your code. And I'm fairly new at this agency, so I say, well, okay, let's find out if that's true. So let me see if I can model this process. Let me see if I can go through the process, the official process, document it, find out how hard it is, be a model for people in the lab, and a resource for them. So that was about a year ago that I started that, and it's not finished. And it's incredibly frustrating. It has been, I would, use the thing that Julie just said, sort of like training a new muscle, which is, there's two of them. One is just like, I've never been in a situation where like I'm just dealing with layers and layers of bureaucracy and trying to parse documents that don't make any sense to me about this kind of stuff. So, just trying to do that patiently and like not letting it get to me, but moving forward. But then also I think, as more of a curious person and interested in software, like I really like to solve my own problems. It's like I see something that I don't understand, I really like to solve it myself. I'm not great at reaching out early and asking for help. But when confronted with things like this, when it's like I know I can't handle legal stuff. Like I definitely look, this is a question for a lawyer, and I don't know. So just like having to email lawyers at NASA, who I feel totally unqualified to talk to, but just ask them for help. We're like, okay, what do we do here? This is what my employer is saying, and I don't know what to do. So that building that muscle, and it usually doesn't go great, but we usually get through it. So it builds a certain resilience.
Good for you. Yeah. And thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing, Ian, and sticking to it. That's how these changes happen, is like those emails, those questions, asking for help early.
I'll tell a little story that is a little related to that, Ian. We have to write these standard operating procedures for each GitHub organization that we set up that's within Enterprise. And this was something the team decided that we need to do. And we didn't have a template for that, or there was a template, but at my center, we were like, we do not like that template. That is too restrictive. We'll never get any work done. And also, we're the ones, the people writing it, we're going to have to be the administrators of the organization. So I'm one of the admins. I'm like, I don't want to do that. That's too much work. Like, I don't want to have these admin rules because like I have other work to do. And we didn't, like, we were the first one who went through the process of like getting all the official approvals, and we wrote it down as we went through. And then when we had this like standard operating procedure thing and it was all signed off and stamped, we decided to share it with every other team that had to create one of these. And that, like, we didn't have to do that, and other groups hadn't done that, but we thought, what the heck? And that was really interesting to watch how immediately other groups adopted it. They're like, oh, this is great. We'll grab that. Now we know what to do. And that got everybody, just kind of got the ball rolling by sharing how we got through bureaucracy. So I think like what you're doing, like learning how to do it and then kind of like being able to share, not just with your own 100-person group, that's a really big group, but also like if you find a way to share that more broadly within NASA, right? Because it's kind of specific to NASA.
Rich, I see some examples from you in here. If you'd like to share, you can share a few more, or if anyone else wants to, I'd give you the chance first.
Yeah, okay. I don't know, maybe the second one, which is you see this coming up all the time at organizations where some new thing gets implemented and in the name of computer security, and there's first of all, as scientists, you're show me the data, like that this is going to actually improve things, or what's the potential risk to the organization, and how is that, and what is the potential negative impact on our ability to actually complete the mission of our agency. um and I just have an example there, like I don't know how many agencies implemented this ridiculous external email, open with caution, like as the beginning of the subject of the email, which instantly turned my inbox into something that was unintelligible because every single email started with this long thing. And so I couldn't tell even what the subject was anymore by like a quick scan of my email. And it was so frustrated. It made me so angry and so sad about my organization. Like, like it was just a morale buster. Like, I thought USGS was awesome. Why would they go do something this stupid, without asking anybody? And, I don't know. It seems like that happens a lot at agencies. And I don't know, Eli, if you've had any, success of like getting people in the room who can talk about the potential impact, like when something that doesn't involve, say, the science or the, agency, but it, is maybe it's a legitimate security concern and maybe it does make sense, but there's never a discussion with people who, how would this impact the work that you do for the agency? At least I didn't see it, like, I don't know, is it done differently at fisheries or elsewhere? Anybody else?
Yeah, so I mean, we get the same things happening at NOAA for sure. And the motivation behind the GitHub governance team was experiences like that, of like decisions being made that break critical things because they didn't talk with the people who would know whether things would break if they did these things. And yeah, so it was a lot of work to create a governance team. It well, not just the work of like creating the terms of reference, but kind of looking for opportunities in which we could say we want a governance team, and being willing to serve on that. So,
So
but
maybe
that
that's
has
the
made
answer,
a
huh?
big
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
But
So
even then, like things have happened. Like in the beginning, there were missteps, and I guess being willing to not hold a grudge when IT made missteps. There was a lot of anger. Like a decision was made, about like putting out a GitHub policy and it didn't go through the governance team. And so like that had to be really escalated. There were lots of like angry emails about, no, what you just said would break everything. You don't understand how this is being used. And yeah.
Yeah, that seems like really important to be able to figure out how to get to that point where everybody is saying, we are on the same team here.
Mhm.
It's not just like IT's the enemy or the scientists are the enemy or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of why I put the trust slide up there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen overnight. And knowing that you're going to backstep sometimes. I think like right now on our committee, it's nice that the head of the headquarters, IT, OCIO, attends our meetings. their monthly meetings. And she attends the GitHub, governance meeting. And that came about in part because like missteps had been made. And just like, okay, then you need to be like, it's helpful for us. I mean, no, it was something like she did, like she's a really great person and really like wants these systems to work really well. And just being aware that sort of unawareness about like core systems creates problems.
Mhm.
So like slowly getting like when these things happen, like figuring out like, okay, where is this happening? Maybe not with the email, but with other things, like where is it happening? How do I get those people to engage more with the end users so they understand us better and we come up with better ways to make decisions that don't break things? I think
Maybe I'll go ahead.
I was going to say John made a really like good point here. Like,
Mhm.
we don't know the stresses that they are under, IT are under, just as they don't understand the stresses that we're experiencing. When I put that trust slide up there, the trust goes both ways. The scientists can be really snippy and to the IT in ways that are not helpful either. Like we can just get into arguments rather than collaborating together. And yeah, they're under stresses and rules that we don't understand. But working on getting the group to be collaborative and to take a mindset of there are mutually beneficial solutions. That it takes a while to get to that point. That where each side is like willing to say, yes, they are, and we will work to find those mutually beneficial solutions.
I think we'll shift into closing now so we can end 5 minutes before the hour, if that seems like a good idea. I'll just point before we do that to the example I put in about the California EPA water boards, because I think it ties up kind of this value of storytelling and sharing these stories really nicely. They are a small agency in California with a lot of moving parts, but like NOAA Fisheries, they have like an outsized impact as leaders for what open science and culture change can be. And partly that's through watching NOAA Fisheries really closely and following them as a role model. So they're taking a year to build their early adopter community right now, focused on like finding those hard things and taking care of them together as a mentor community in order to welcome more folks to open practices like GitHub or shared documentation and whatnot. So I think that's just really cool and something to celebrate, as we go forth. So yeah, good work, NOAA Fisheries and everybody here. And thanks for sharing all your stories. So we just have a few notes in closing at the bottom of the doc. I think, happy to share this with you, Eli. Thank you all. Change is possible. The belief. Yeah, Eli, why don't you say a few words?
Yeah, just what you said, change is possible. And stepping back when you're feeling really frustrated, or for me, learning to step back when I'm really frustrated and, focus on small things that can help, small things that, Leslie put a, good thing in there, attending an IT focused, meeting last year and becoming more empathetic with the other side can help figure out ways to get groups to work together better, so that, one side is not sending off like, kind of very stern, not nice emails to the other side that create lack of trust and anger. Yeah, it is possible. It is possible.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's possible.
Thanks so much, Eli. So we just have a few resources and announcements here in the doc too. This is the third session we've led with folks with NOAA Fisheries at ESIP in our meetings, and so that you can see the story unfold 2022, 2023, and now in 2025, which is awesome. So thank you, ESIP, for making this space. There's many other stories in progress, including the California Water Boards, like I mentioned, and NASA OpenScapes that are all learning from each other cross-fed, in addition to here at ESIP. And we often end our mentor calls and champions calls with efficiency and inclusion tips of the day. And this one was one that spoke to me, that I thought I'd share with you all. It's from a book called Active Hope by Macy and Johnstone. And the quote is, "If we focus only on individual separate activities, it's easy to dismiss each one by thinking that it won't do that much. But to see the power of a step, we need to ask, what is this a part of?" And an action that might seem inconsequential by itself it adds to and interacts with other actions in a way that contributes to much bigger picture of change. So I just feel like that question to yourself, what is this a part of, can help us all feel more empowered as we go forward together. So thanks for having the opportunity to share this space with you all today. And we'll see you around ESIP.